then we'll begin. My name is Austin Williams. I'm from the Future Cities Project. I actually now live in China, just flew in for this conference, just to sound like a carbon guzzling twat. The aeroplane missed connection, 6.5 hours in Paris airport. It did make me realize the irony of this session. Transport wasn't going anywhere for me on Friday afternoon, so hopefully the return flight will be a bit better. But it did also make me think about the fact that aeroplanes have been around for 100 years, cars have been around for 130, 150 years, and trains have been around for 200 years. And you do think, where's the big idea? Is there something new? Is that it? Do we have to always just add something extra onto the existing mode of transport, or can we imagine new modes of transport? Where is transport going? So the argument seems to be that we have to have a little bit of technology add-on, or that we have to maybe travel less. These seem to be two of the arguments. We have to eke out a little bit extra from the infrastructure and from the modes of transport that we have. Driverless pods. I don't know where this has come from, but in the last 2 years this seems to have taken over everybody's conversation on this topic, driverless pods, whereas I always thought a car that you didn't drive yourself was called a taxi, so I don't really know what the big idea is there. So we want to just look at, more importantly, the idea not just of transport and invention and innovation and new technologies, even though I think this is a very important part of the discussion, but I also think the debate about transport as mobility, as the need to travel. If you remember back in 1996, anybody remembers John Prescott? He used to be very popular back in the 1990s, talking about the idea that we should reduce the need to travel, which sounds like a very commonsensical thing to do. Why travel if you don't have to? But actually I think maybe contains a little bit of a seed of restraint and restriction, that actually maybe travel is a good thing in its own terms. Maybe travel broadens the mind. Maybe there's something more to this discussion than just a carbon emissions spreadsheet. So do we have to be responsible travelers? What is the moral position on this discussion as well as the technological one? So that's the kind of general outline from me. The speakers may ignore it, but that's up to them. But I think that there's some very important points that we can try and get out of this. So I'm going to introduce the speakers in the order in which they speak, and a very influential panel they are too. Let me just start. And I've made them sit in order of speaking because I'm a very simple person. So on the far right here we have Chris Moody, Head of Innovation Commercialization at the Transport Systems Catapult. Before that he was at ISIS Innovation, not the radical jihadist movement. Have you heard that before? But a technology transfer company at the University of Oxford. He's got extensive international business experience, particularly in Asia, Latin America, US, and the Middle East. So we'll have I think from many people here, we'll have a global perspective, not just looking at the UK. Peter Stevens, it's a little bit understated to say that he's a vehicle designer. The man responsible for the McLaren McLaren F1. I was so excited by the Lotus Elan, which I didn't realise, because my favourite car, the Lotus Elan. I'm hoping for a test drive, or maybe a free one after this plot. The Lotus Elan Jaguar XJR 15. During his career, he's worked with Aston Martin, Lamborghini, BMW, Tata, General Motors, and blah, blah, blah. He's now visiting professor of the vehicle design department at the Royal College of Art, where I had the pleasure many, many moons ago of doing some tutorials with him. Next we have Chris Barton, who's worked for Jaguar Land Rover for 30 years. You could hardly tell. Started when he was 10. Most recently he's been involved in product marketing for JLR's Special Vehicles organisation, focusing on the development of the company's top-end products. Again, another plug. And then finally we have Kevin McCulloch, a product strategist working for the consultancy Plan, which he founded, and it's the 10th anniversary, like the Battle of Ideas. So prior to this he was the director of the product design consultancy Seymour Powell, and over the years, for 20 years, he's had transport clients from Ford, Shell, Toyota and Yamaha, and he writes for a variety of publications from Fast Company to the Design Management Review. So a wealth of experience within the industry and commentating on the industry from insiders as well as critics. So hopefully we can have a rounded conversation on this topic. So without further ado, as they say, Chris, if you want to kick us off, give it some stick.
All right, well, I think one of the trends in the world is that everyone's expectation is that what they want is available on demand when they want it. And the internet and the ability to quickly search through the internet has driven this thinking. And now that is trickling over into every part of our lives. And when you look at transportation in the past, it was something that was inflicted on us. Basically, there were modes of transport and you had to adapt to riding the train and getting to the train station, or getting in a car and driving it in a limited way. And the expectation now is moving more toward mobility and intelligent mobility. How can we make transportation work for us as opposed to having to adapt to it? And the move toward driverless vehicles is part of this, where there are many people that would prefer not to have to drive if they didn't have to. And there are many businesses that would see an economic benefit from having driverless vehicles for freight transport, buses, taxi drivers, airlines, trains, everything will eventually probably go driverless. And this transition is lining up with some other interesting trends in society. One is that we're moving more toward electrification of vehicles. And this is mainly being driven by environmental reasons and the efficiency of electric vehicles. There's a lot of debate about the electricity that's used and how it's generated, and that's a whole other topic. But the vehicles themselves, electric motors, are very efficient. And that trend, along with the move toward more on-demand vehicles like Uber and shared vehicles, when you combine that with the move to autonomous vehicles, what you see coming together in some time frame between 10 to 25 years from now is where the world will probably be dominated by vehicles that are driverless, electric, and on demand. And probably the vast majority of us will be driving or riding in shared vehicles rather than owning a vehicle because of the economics of it and the convenience. So that's the kind of the picture of the future that I see, and there are a lot of different views on that, and you can argue all day about the timing of when those things might happen.
What's good about that?
Well, I think a number of things. Convenience. I think our ability to get where we want to go easier is definitely part of it. The cost of running electric vehicles should become much cheaper than petrol vehicles because of the efficiency, again, of electric engines. And the efficiency of batteries is improving considerably, not at a linear rate, but almost an exponential rate of improvement. The other thing is that people won't lose their mobility as they age, and people that are handicapped will be able to have a freedom they've never had before. So there are a lot of wonderful things about it, I think, and it will be cleaner.
Very good. Thank you very much indeed, Chris. Round of applause, please. Okay, not too much. Peter.
Okay, I'd start by saying that I'm a very passionate believer in personal mobility. I think personal mobility is democratizing. You know, I think it has the potential for being extravagant, but it is a democratizing thing when people can make their own decisions about when and where they intend to travel. Now, I suppose I'm characterized in the program as somebody who really likes the idea of burning petrol, because a lot of the projects I have done have seemed extravagant, whether they are race Williams cars, two different cars that won the Le Mans 24-hour race, for example, or one of the most extravagant supercars. But the reason I like that is because I think that drives technological advance. What I always say, and why a racing program interests me, is because I know in about 2 minutes whether I had a good idea or not, because at the end of the lap the thing has either been competitive and efficient or it hasn't in designing a car, I might have to wait 3 years to get the same answer. So I like the buzz that comes from the immediacy of understanding the effect of your own efforts. Now, I do think that, in a way, and I say that petrol it's too valuable a resource to waste on going to work. You know, it's pretty darn silly when you see hundreds of cars just going into work. But I do believe that traveling to work is a good idea. You know, some of my work's in my studio at home, and occasionally I do lack for the interchange that you get about ideas, which is one of the reasons I like teaching. And I think this concept that in the future we will all sit at home and just be digitally connected is really going to be a major negative in creativity and our personal productivity. So I think going to work will always be important. But as I say, I think that petrol's too valuable to be wasted on that. You know, it may be petrol should be so expensive that it's just for fun. You know, if it's £50 a gallon and it's used as a kind of entertainment like motorsport or something, maybe actually that's a more interesting thing to imagine that we could do with energy. I think that you mentioned here the autonomous car. When I first saw this Google car, I was really disappointed at what a wretched, miserable thing it was, and I thought if ever there's a way of putting off the idea of wanting to have an autonomous car, it's something as rudimentary and grim-looking as that. And the whirligig on the top is a truly absurd way of discovering where the car is. But the idea is excellent. I mean, because I'm a car enthusiast, I imagine everybody else likes driving, and in truth, in a city, particularly driving is a miserable experience, and a lot of people as they get older are fearful of the whole act of driving. An autonomous car would liberate those people to still be able to go to places that they want to go. Partially sighted or blind people would suddenly be able to have their own source of mobility, you know, and it could really do spectacular things for their lives. The problem is it's linked with use of electricity. Now, if that were full of diesel fuel and I put it in a Volkswagen XL1, I could go 20 kilometers. To go 20 kilometers on electricity, I need 60 batteries of the same size, you know? Now, the amount of energy in the diesel is extraordinary. The weight of it is minimal. The weight of 60 of those as batteries is enormous, so we get an inefficiency even though it looks like it's cheaper because we don't know how it's been made, as the earlier session was talking about. So I'm personally not convinced about the electricity at the moment. I think if we could be much more efficient with our diesel, then we could get that to take us 50 kilometers. One of the ways we could do that is that if we had access to American military global positioning, all our cars would know where they are within 3 inches of each other, 75 mil of each other, and they wouldn't need to run into each other, and we would throw away 300, 400, 500 kilos of safety defences that we build into the cars because they run into each other. You know? So I think we need to look at this in a much broader sense than that, you know, because suddenly we'd be in little cars which only weigh 300 kilos. Then that could take us 50 kilometres.
Thank you very much. Do we do the hydrogen gag now?
We can do.
Tell us the hydrogen gag bit.
Well, it isn't really a gag, it's just that I went to I was at a very interesting discussion, and a scientist said that hydrogen being suggested as the fuel of the future looks really good in PowerPoint, but it looks crap in Excel.
You're right, you wasn't good.
But it's true.
Round of applause, please. Okay, Chris, please, follow that.
Okay, as one of the representatives of the motor industry, I wasn't going to talk about the motor industry, so I was wanted to talk about transport and travel in general. I think we, as a race, as human beings, it's good for us to travel, as Austin suggested at the start. It helps broaden the mind, it's what we need to do. The key thing is, how can we make it more efficient so that we can travel on less resources and do the same things? There's a series of marginal gains that are going to be made, only in my view. We're not going to have a magic bullet that solves all the problems for everybody. The key thing is that there's a capacity for the system that we need to, that keeps getting filled as more improvements are put in place. Then the more people travel, and hence travel times extend again, and so everything slows down, and so we're back where we started. So the key thing is to keep those marginal gains, and Peter mentioned one of those in terms of vehicles being able to travel more closely together, and be lighter, so they're more fuel efficient. And those are examples of marginal gains that will help increase the capacity of the system. It's true to say, as well, as I understand it, travel time across London hasn't actually changed much in nearly a century. As transport improvements have been made hand over fist in that time, it's still, the average speed is about the same as it was a century ago in the days of the horse and car. And that is because more of us are travelling all the time and doing that. So that's an example of the bucket that keeps filling. Same is true of airport hold-ups, etc., etc. We have a lot of restrictions in our travel, but there is still that desire to travel that goes forward. The key thing about transport and travel, as far as I'm concerned, is what can you do whilst you're travelling? How the travel experience itself is the focus on most people's minds as to how it can be improved for the time that they are travelling, as they get to where they want to go. And that's where the most successful business cases that I've seen have been. You know, there's about luxury transportation, lounges in airports, luxury cars, private jets, and it's not necessarily reducing the speed or reducing the time taken to travel, it's about improving the experience whilst you are travelling. My view on autonomous cars is actually quite mixed in this. Yes, they have the ability of allowing an occupant, if there is an occupant and there's not just cargo, to do what they want to do, but I'm really concerned about how that will be treated legally, in terms of whether somebody is actually in control of a vehicle that they're riding in, even though they're looking at their iPad or reading the paper or whatever they need to do. And I think we've got a long way to go before we bottom that out, and so autonomous cars will be able to really take off. That's not to say that they're not worth investigating, but there's a lot of work still to be done on the non-technical side of vehicle autonomy. Driverless pods. Not sure about those. We've had cable cars for a long time, aren't they, driverless pods? And yet they've never appeared in cities, so that goes on. I am more interested, however, in the different vehicle ownership models that I think, as Chris mentioned at the start, timeshare of cars, car clubs, peer-to-peer renting. There's a lot of scope there to increase people's mobility going forward, and will help gain efficiency on the road, because obviously only one person can use a vehicle at a time, and will help with that. I'm also with Peter on electricity. I think, although at a very local level, yes, electric cars are very much more environmentally friendly than internal combustion engine cars. But when you consider the rare earth metals that have to be used in their production, the mass of the batteries that you have to carry around all the time, the length of time to charge, there's actually a real question as to how environmentally friendly they are. And you have a two-stage transfer of energy rather than a single stage, going from a droplet of fuel to forward motion. So I don't think anybody has the solution. I think there are a lot of improvements that can be made to enable people to increase their mobility and get more out of our existing transport systems that we have today. And that's the way I see the future taking place.
Thank you very much. Great, and somebody shot the child. Win-win. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I have to admit to living in a permanent state of disappointment about the future of transport. As a a child of the late 60s and early 70s, the space age and supersonic travel were a reality. They were in the future. Well, not for me, of course, but when I switched on the TV, they were. And, you know, maglev trains around the corner, all this stuff that I grew up expecting to see just hasn't happened. A few decades later, when I was a product designer, late 90s, working on concepts for autonomous cars, we might see them in another 10 years or what have you. So when I'm involved in debates and people start getting all excited about Boris bikes and zip cars being the future of mobility, I'm like, really? Is that the best we can do? So I guess that's my rather sort of downbeat starting point. In terms of Austin's question about, you know, for or against mobility, more and more travel, I'm definitely on the more mobility, the better side of that one. I think one of the dynamics of modernity really has been people travelling further, faster, cheaper, safer, more comfortably, more conveniently. And I think that is an unalloyed good. Mass ownership of cars, cheap flights, high-speed rail, they've all broadened our minds and our experiences. On the economic front, you've got innovations like from container shipping to, you know, just the fact that workers can travel further and further to work because they can travel faster. That all raises productivity and contributes to growth. That said, a report came out last week, I think it was, that estimated that the cost of congestion for the UK economy is currently 8.5 billion and rising. So we've got a lot of work to do just to keep things moving. So I think a few decades ago, saying that mobility was an out-and-out good thing and a progressive thing would have been fairly uncontroversial. Now you get more pushback on the grounds of congestion, on the grounds of emissions, and more lately on the grounds of obesity. You know, we should all be walking and cycling more, sort of thing. And I think at the heart of this is sometimes a covered-up tension between most of us who want to get around fast, cheaply, conveniently, and a sort of quite powerful elite of meddling nudgers who want to curtail our mobility, I would argue. And these guys sort of obsess about our lifestyle choices, set up choice frameworks to nudge us in directions that they deem morally responsible. So you've got city authorities like sort of driving cars out of city centres with congestion charging, extortionate parking fees, pedestrianisation, what have you. Hamburg announced recently that it was going to, or it plans to, banish cars from 40% of the city centre by 2032. You've got environmental and health campaigners really campaigning for more cycling and walking. A favourite example of that was up in Newcastle a few years ago. There was a whole series of sustainability projects. And one of them was to look at how, in a quite low-income ex-pit village outside Newcastle, how to get the kids to school in the next village. And it was low-income families, not much car ownership. And one of the express constraints of the project is that it couldn't raise car ownership. And with all seriousness, the proposal that was put forward was called My School Bus, and it involved parents and kids at one end of the village walking towards school and picking up other parents and kids on the way to school. And as that procession of parents and kids got longer and longer, they called it My School Bus. And that was deemed as a progressive, come rain or shine, walk to the next village to school. And just to top it off, the guy running the whole sustainability festival flew back to his home in the south of France business class every other weekend, which I think often symptomises a lot of double standards in this debate. It's the rich that travel the most, but it's often cheap flights that get us in the neck. So there's this conflict, I think, between that mass aspiration for more mobility and this constraint. And there's another example of that is Tallinn in Estonia conducted a bit of an experiment last year where in an attempt to get cars off the road, they made public transport completely free. I can't remember for how long, but call it a few months. And what was the impact? 1% rise in use of public transport. And that was mainly from low-income citizens getting on the metro instead of walking. So it didn't reduce car use, it lowered walking, ironically. But I think planners tend to underestimate the value that most people put on convenient door-to-door transport. That convenience is often poo-pooed. And I think people love their cars. People, we've done quite a lot of work in this area, and despite all the, I'm going to finish up. Despite all the anti-car propaganda in this area, people love their cars, including the young. If you follow these debates, a lot of people have you believe that Gen Y, 20, 30-somethings, are falling out of love with the car. They're in love with their smartphones, Facebook, zip car or whatever. But they still aspire to, it still means freedom and responsibility, freedom and individuality to them in the same way it did to previous generations. They're just strapped with student debt and haven't got a decent job yet. I'll save my comments on autonomous cars to later.
Thank you very much. Okay, again, if you'll allow me to ask a couple of questions to the panelists before we come out to yourselves. I just wanted to ask Chris and Peter generally this, because you both raised efficiency as a driver, if you excuse the pun, but the efficiency motif is very strong in both of your speeches. I just want to know what the point of more efficiency is. Why are you making things more efficient?
Well, I think the main reason is to preserve resources. We're living in a world that has finite resources, and fuel is one of the resources that we're depleting at a very rapid rate that's accelerating more every year. And if we can find ways to slow that down, there are benefits for everyone.
I only use the example of over the last 20 years or so that homeowners have used 30% less electricity in their houses, but they have 30% more white goods. So, it's like zero-sum gain in some respects there.
Right.
But what I'm trying to get at is both of you are improving efficiency of cars, possibly also to sell more cars. So, I'm wondering whether it's a completely an agenda for saving resources, or whether it's something more.
The previous discussion was about keeping the lights on, energy usage, those kind of things. And I thought that swerved off, and we risked swerving off into confusing this with climate change. I think that it's beholden on us to save this energy and these fossil fuels, whether climate change is real or not. It's no good saying there's no such thing as climate change, so let's piss all the fuel away. I really don't think we should do that anyway. I get frustrated at how inefficient we are, like I said. How inefficient we are. We use a 50,000 horsepower machine to drive 200 passengers from the end of the runway to the terminal, and from the terminal to the beginning of the runway, instead of a little 100 horsepower tractor. How mad is that? I do some consulting with Virgin Galactic Airlines, and Sir Richard insisted that the airlines were painted silver instead of white. That added 10 tons to the weight of Airbus 340. That means using that much more fuel. This is completely mad. For example, yesterday I was in Tesco's, and there were blackberries from Guatemala on sale. This morning I got up early and I nipped out and I picked up pots of blackberries to have for breakfast before I came here. Each ton of blackberries uses about 140 litres of fuel to fly it from Guatemala. That kind of inefficiency just appalls me, and it appalls me as a designer as well as just a member of the community.
And the new economics forum, foundation, what do they call it? Andrew Simslot, argue that we should turn off our Christmas tree lights every year and save X amount of carbon emissions. But you kind of think, what a miserable bunch they are. I mean, there's some things more than maybe just saving a bit of carbon.
Absolutely, but wanting blackberries from Guatemala, is truly absurd. I mean, yeah, Christmas is about the lights. I find that cool. It's fine. I don't use LED lights at Christmas because they're staringly awful. Like a nice incandescent bulb.
I can't comment on Guatemalan blackberries, but give me South African strawberries any day. Anyway,
I live in South Africa.
Well, look, this is the key discussion here, right? About, for me, I think the discussion about less is more, right? Which was a motif of the modernists, going back 100 years, but from all the way to Buckminster Fuller in the 1950s. And part of the argument was, yes, less is good. Doing more with less is good. But the point was, it was the doing more bit. So he was being efficient with a view to then striving for more and improvement and giving more access to more people. So we'll ponder that thought. But again, Chris, a similar point, because you were also following this, I thought some of these ideas Edward de Bono came up with in the 1970s. Edward de Bono, who's still with us, who talked about eking out more efficiency from the existing transport networks, that in order to reduce congestion, you should stagger the start time of offices all around Britain, so you'd go to work at 4 o'clock in the morning just to minimise congestion. And the timeshare thing. So, I mean, is this really a visionary, this is Kevin's point, is this really kind of a visionary thing, or is this just something staving off some horrible day when we're going to have to make a bold decision?
I wouldn't suggest at all that it's visionary. It is about giving us the ability to have more mobility and allowing more people to travel with the limited resources that we have, either whether it's fuel, whether it's road space, whether it's trains, or whatever. So I wouldn't countenance getting up at 4 in the morning, but at least if we can increase the capacity of the system, because there's no doubt that more and more people want to travel as time goes on, and give them the capability to travel when they want to, how they want to where they want to, then that can only be a good thing. If I could just come back on the previous point as well, and that's about efficiency of fuels. I feel very strongly that there's too much political influence in what is deemed to be an environmentally friendly or environmentally efficient means of propulsion. Electricity is the key factor today, but I've already mentioned about its potential environmental impact. If you look at the price of electricity versus the price of diesel or petrol, then that's another major reason why it's deemed to be a good thing for us. However, certainly in this country and a lot of countries around the world, the vast majority, the biggest impact on the price of those fuels is taxation. And if electricity was taxed at anywhere near the level that gasoline is, then it would be nowhere near as cheap a means of propulsion.
Okay, let me ask you a question. It's kind of a question to all of you, but I think, Kevin, I'm interested to see what you say about it, which is the idea that travel is a good thing, that there should be more of it, blah, blah, blah. But as a parody number, if 1 billion Chinese people get off their bicycles, this kind of hyper-efficient, environmentally friendly form of transport, and buy cars, right? Is that a good thing?
I think he's wrong.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. Sorry.
They're 4x4s. I don't have an issue with that. I guess the implicit in that is that the emissions and all the rest of it. I personally think that to counter Peter's point, I think using resources that aren't that scarce, to be honest. I don't know if you've seen the oil prices, but people aren't using that peak oil argument so much these days after tight oil and shale gas and all the rest of it. You know, OPEC are a bit worried that USA is now one of the biggest exporters of oil. There's plenty left, and also the current, well, not current, but the current and future generations of combustion engines are getting incredibly efficient and clean. I think in the last 10 years, efficiency and emissions have made really big strides. I think in terms of congestion, another argument against that in China is congestion. I think China has got a lot more of a can-do attitude to congestion. I think they'll build double-decker highways, they'll bore tunnels, they'll try and solve it rather than just try and nudge people's behaviours. So I don't think we've got any right finally to dictate that they can't have the lifestyle that we have.
Anybody want to come back on that in terms of Chinese driving cars, because it's key to your environmental point?
Yeah, I think Kevin's absolutely right. It's not for us to say that we've enjoyed the motor car for 100 years, but you shouldn't. You know, I think that would be important, actually. What would be nice if countries like China, India, Brazil looked at what we've done wrong, really, and become more efficient, either in their road networks or in the vehicles that they use, for sure. I mean, I don't think at the moment it's in Chinese culture to do a 1,000-mile car trip, you know, but undoubtedly it is to have that mobility within a reasonably local thing. And I'm convinced it's not for me to tell them not to do it, because, you know, I'd like to save the petrol for racing at Le Mans. I think that would be outrageous. So I'm really not, you know, I'm not inclined to do that at all.
There's plenty left.
Yeah, but there should always be plenty left. Because one day, there won't be plenty left, you know. I don't know how long it will be. It doesn't matter if it's 1,000 years. You know, the fact that we have been around for 40,000 years, you know, means that even if it's 1,000 years, you know, that's lumbering somebody else, you know, with all sorts of hidden problems.
Because that's the problem with solar power, isn't it? In 6 billion years it's going to run out. Right.
But it'll be massive before it comes.
Right, ladies and gentlemen, let me take any questions that you have. What I'll do, just so you understand, I'll just take maybe 2 or 3 questions. Please don't try and answer them all. You just pick one that you kind of have a fancy to this. I'll take this gentleman here, the posh man.
Posh man.
Do you want me to stand? I'll stand.
Yeah.
I had a number of questions, but I think I'll start with one. And there's been no discussion, I think, about sort of the equivalent of road pricing. Pricing for access to mobility in order to help manage the resources. And I think, although, I mean, I actually live in the countryside, so I came by about 4 different modes of transport here and broke down on the way. But you know, cities are different from the countryside about what you need. I mean, I don't bring a car into London; it's pointless. And although it's nice to go from A to B, if it takes 3 hours when you do it in an hour on the train, it's pointless. And actually, it's pleasant because you can do other things. But one of the issues is around the pricing of transport. Because sometimes I'd like to go by the train, it takes the same time, but it's cheaper to fly. And often when I want a resource, I'd like to know what the price is, because that would be, then I could make a decision about when I travelled. You can do that on planes and trains, but actually when you want a taxi or a mini cab or some shared transport, you can't do that yet. And perhaps you could. And you know, also when you hire a car, maybe when you hire it, it will be different prices. So I think this IT and pricing is a key part of this, which you haven't touched at all.
We just had a prior discussion on smart cities where some of this did come up, so where were you? We should have texted you to let you know. The gentleman just across. Yes.
What are the panel's views on solar roadways and the equivalent usage of those to have inbuilt inductive charging? So as you drive along a motorway, you therefore don't have to carry along such heavy batteries, and you're able to charge as you go via solar roadways?
Thank you very much. Straightforward question. And did you have your hand up, sir? No? Yes? Well, you'll pass the microphone along to the gentleman.
It's interesting that the kindly man in the blue shirt says that one of the problems with electric vehicles is rare earths. I think that shows how much the green sensibility dominates the design profession now. And for me, the problem is to do with your plastic cups. That's the problem with electric vehicles. And in the search for efficiency and fuel economy, we do need to remember that the internal combustion engine is not just much more efficient than the electric battery, but it faces the laws of thermodynamics. That efficiency cannot be improved infinitely. And secondly, if fuel economy went to 100 miles a gallon, I'd be driving 100 miles with it, not 50. This is called the Jevons paradox, or the rebound effect. So all the people who talk a good game on fuel efficiency and all of that are getting away from the point that we face inexorably rising transport demand, and that all attempts to try to check it by saving the planet and economizing on abundant resources, Kevin's right about that, are foolish. What we need is a whole lot more transport. And I want to ask, you know, the person so worried about blueberries, I think, or was it blackberries? Blackberries from Guatemala. Do you drink wine, sir?
Wine that I make?
Sorry, wine that you make. Well, I know English vineyards are having a revival at the moment, but I would suggest that yours is a scurvy philosophy, because what you are saying is that we can only eat what is in season in England or in your garden vineyard, because anything else would be food miles and damage to the planet. And if you want to reform our palates, go right ahead, but most of us will be drinking wine from France, Italy, and not your own garden.
One more. The lady here.
Hello. Oh! Goodness me. Walk away from there. Where's my hover car? When I was a kid, I was promised before I was 40 I'd have a hover car, and I'm 40 in 2 months and I don't have a hover car. And I want to know from the car designers when I'm going to get my hover car.
I'll address the hover car.
Yeah, hey, everyone.
Yeah, I think, you know, we all grew up watching the Jetsons and these things, and seeing, you know, flying vehicles. It's interesting, there is a kind of a renewed interest in flying vehicles now, and part of this is being driven by drone technology, but also the improvement again in batteries. If you look at some of the projections on battery improvement over the next 20 years, the weight to power density ratio of the batteries is dropping to the point where flying personal vehicles will probably be economic. There are a lot of questions about noise and safety and those things, but it's not inconceivable that in 20 years we'll have completely automated flying personal vehicles. And the technology will be there. The questions are more about, you know, is it safe? Do we want them? If they're noisy, you probably don't want them flying over the roof of your house all night. But there are a lot of projections that do show that they're coming. So it isn't an idea that's dead. And there's a company in California called Terrafuga. I don't know if you've heard of this or not, but they're actually designing flying personal vehicles that are fully electric and fully automated. And they're working with the US government, the FAA now, on trying to get a special certification for fully automated flying vehicles.
The answer is wait.
Yeah, but it's not a dream, it's gone away.
Yep. Peter, you and your nosy.
Okay, there were a couple of things. The road pricing one is interesting. The problem is that would then be under the control of the government, and I wouldn't trust them to make any decision that wasn't politically based rather than engineering based. Electric cars now have what's called the Euro 7 pin plug, despite the fact we only use 3 of the pins for pulling electricity into cars. Everybody believes the other pins will be for things like road pricing or taxing electricity. So theoretically it's an attractive idea. You know, practically I don't trust the people at all who would be involved in deciding what it should be. Now there was another question I think which was interesting because an American company made a survey of what they called dust to rust, which is the amount of energy that a vehicle uses from the raw materials being dug out of the ground to being used during its life and then being dismantled at the end of it. Much to the disappointment of a lot of the auto industry, the vehicle by far the most efficient was a Jeep Wrangler. And about 70th was a Toyota Prius, and about 75th was Honda Insight. I mean, the only gratification is that a Maybach was absolutely last at like 160. But it's those figures tell you, you know, that our throwaway society as it is with cars and it isn't built-in obsolescence, but it's the demands of marketing people for constant change so people buy new cars, is a terribly inefficient thing to do. And finally, you know, the question of the blackberries, it's very simple. We used to eat the things that were available at that time of the year. You know, now, you know, that didn't give people a horribly miserable existence, you know. Yeah, sure, we used to grow enough grapes in England that we could make a lot of wine. I mean, England was a vineyard, one of the vineyards for Rome, you know. And a van coming across from France, you know, isn't a great criticism. It's kind of crazy when you have similar wine that comes from South America, you know, or Australia, to just serve our kind of dilettante tastes, you know.
Speak for yourself.
Well, actually I am, yeah, I would say this is true. You know, I don't demand other people make those decisions, but it's one that I make because I think it represents what I believe in. Somebody clapped, almost. Finish your clap.
All right, I'll come back to you later. All right, Chris, do you want to come up?
Well, it looks like I'm left with the inductive charging question then. Okay, I don't feel qualified to talk about this, but yeah, I'll take any opportunity. As far as I understand it, I know that there are some systems in terms of inductive charging of vehicles in garages. I'm not sure whether they're on the market yet or about to become on the market. So you've got a stationary electric car with an inductive plate that you park over it and it charges up overnight. I believe that the amount of energy required to do that on the move would be so enormous that it would drag the vehicle down into the ground due to its own magnetic attraction or something. So I think we're a long way short in terms of having the technology for that. The other comment I'd like to make, road pricing. That, as far as I'm concerned, that's just another method of putting in a marginal gain to increase the capacity of the system overall. I'm sure that there'll be a lot of objection to it. I know there's a lot of objection to it because it's yet another charge against the motorist, particularly in this country. So yes, it is an opportunity as far as I see it, but like any other political thing, it's just another way of changing people's behaviour, isn't it?
Okay. Kevin, on the inductive charging, there actually is a UK program to develop inductive charging on the move, on the motorways, and the Department of Transportation is going to be testing this over the next couple of years. Part of the development is being done with the E-Formula race cars, and the first implementation of that inductive charging on the move will be in the e-race cars. And there's another program in Korea right now where they're actually running buses on the road with continuous inductive charging. So it is a technology that probably will develop, and there are lots of engineering issues around it and safety issues that need to be, you know, really worked out, but it may well work. And if that happens, then the whole scenario of battery weight in these things becomes a different calculation, because now you don't need large batteries, you just can get by with a small battery in the vehicles.
I want to say something about road pricing as well, but just quickly on the Peter's blackberries. That food miles kind of lifestyle kind of argument, I think, is really problematic, because once you get into it, you realise that it's actually the local stuff that's grown in greenhouses are using more energy than the stuff that's flown in. So you get into all this kind of bean county arguments about it. And I just think if you're serious, if you are really serious about emissions, you've surely got to get into infrastructural discussions about nuclear power stations, not which blackberries you choose in supermarkets. It's just, I just don't think it's a serious kind of way of attempting to tackle the problem of that scale. But I think on road pricing, I think for me, I'll go back to Peter's point about democracy. I think that there's something very democratizing about mobility, and that proposal, I would say, is counter to that democratic principle. And also, I think it's a highly technocratic solution that accepts current transport capacity. And I would say we just need to build more capacity. We need to build more motorways, more tunnels, more ring roads. That's the way to solve congestion. And by the way, driving in London's fine. I drove here, only live about a mile away, did a few errands on the way. Having a car in central London works just fine.
He almost sounds evil. Just kidding. Okay, right. I have to be plain to you all. I'm probably not going to take all of your questions. We don't have enough time. But we will have a chat over a drink of imported wine later. Madam, take you first at the front here, please. I'll take it.
Actually, it's partially what you were just saying, because the transport infrastructure in this country is pretty crap if you try to do east-west instead of north-south. I spend a lot of time advising visiting Americans on how to get around the country, and the only way to do it is in a loop. So if we actually started looking at planning as part of our transport development, and actually started looking at what areas of the country desperately need transport, and I think a friend tweeted yesterday that you can't actually get out of Wales very easily, that alone would create greater capacity, help decongestion, help development. I know I decided against a job in Liverpool when I realised just how bloody difficult it was to get to. So there's a lot of stuff there we could be doing. A more general point is that this has just been an astonishingly depoliticised discussion, as if transport exists in some kind of vacuum.
It's been incredibly political, but maybe that's just me. Not maybe the politics we agree with, but I think it's political. We'll take this gentleman at the front here.
Thank you for that intellectual discussion. I'd like to catch on to your remark on a colleague of yours that you were describing, or a person you know who...
Can you all hear?
No. When you were describing a person who takes a flight in business class every week, I'd like to first say that even if he didn't take that flight, that plane would fly. Okay. So by not buying that ticket, he would not make the plane stop. Now, if that airline ran a policy that if they didn't have this many passengers, the plane would not take off, then yes, he would have more power and make a life choice of not flying every week, but doing so otherwise. I've once been on a bus, on a coach, as a single passenger, and I couldn't stop that coach from going to its destination and saying, hey, get me a taxi instead, don't make the coach go. I didn't have the power. And I've been on a train that was 250 tons with just 10 passengers. I think that's a waste, but there's nothing I can do to make that train not go and make a car go instead. Now, when it comes to cars...
Are you going to go through everybody?
No, just the last person. When it comes to cars, yes, by choosing not to drive your car but taking public transport, yes, you can absolutely have an effect. But then this makes the current way of how we sell cars not fit, because currently we're selling expensive luxury cars to the owner, but suddenly if you're sharing cars, you're not completely owning the car. So the entire model of how luxury cars are sold will have to be revisited.
Thank you very much. That was quite eerie. We'll take this gentleman at the front.
Nico MacDonald. Just a note to Peter about preserving hydrocarbon fuels. There's a famous quote, maybe apocryphal, from some member of the Arab oil-owning community that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. We shouldn't fetishize hydrocarbon fuels too much. The chair opened this session by talking about qualitative innovations in transport, from steam trains to cars and so on. And we haven't had a qualitative innovation really since the de Havilland Comet in the 1950s. And I wonder if the panel members think we need a qualitative innovation in transport, if perhaps that qualitative innovation is ICT and the ability to move digits and not atoms. I'm not sure I believe that, but that may be the kind of tangential innovation that we don't see coming, or whether we do need something of the quality of the Hyperloop that was proposed by a Californian innovator, Elon Musk, and what the major barrier that we wouldn't expect that kind of innovation would be. And I'm particularly interested for our friend from the catapult to talk about that, because it seems to me that's what catapults are intended to try and do, to help overcome the unexpected barriers, and there are many, to those kind of qualitative innovations.
Thank you very much. I'll just take one more in this round, and then I'll come back out. Let me just take with these guys in the front, so this gentleman here.
I'll step away. I just have a simple question, which is, in thinking about the future of transport, no one's commented on an integrated transport system, and to think maybe a little bit more about how a multimodal sort of system could work, and how we could rethink personal mobility in a shared context outside of the car.
Thank you very much. Okay, that's this round. Let me just see hands for the next round, because it'll be very quick next time, I'm afraid. Okay, cool. Right, on the panel, address one point coherently, sharply, succinctly.
Okay, in terms of integrated transport systems, I think there are huge opportunities within IT in terms of apps to plan my route and plan my journey. So taking from your own personal mode of transport, where you can best park it, how you can best get to your final destination, the last mile. And yes, I agree that there are huge opportunities outside of the transport arena that helps to integrate it all together. But again, that would just be a marginal gain for the people who want to use it, and as more and more people use it, it will become less and less beneficial, and so we're back to square one again.
Oh, that was succinct. Very good. Thank you very much. Yeah, have a go.
Yep, innovation. Interestingly, it's just one of the other parallels with the previous discussion, where somebody quite rightly said that innovation is actually cheaper than subsidies, but unfortunately innovation seems to have dropped off in almost every industry, whether it's because people are using recession as an excuse for just making more of what they do make, or whether the funding actually isn't there for innovation. But I think it is absolutely fundamental, and innovation is really what we have to do. And it's what design colleges and engineering colleges have to do, is focus much more on innovation, taking the big chance that 90% of the things won't work, even 90%, 95%. But if 5% of things work, then that's absolutely worth it. Innovation is crucial, especially for all those young folk here. Got a garden anyway.
Yeah, but hang on, right. The point, I'm going to talk about your bloody blackberries again, right? If you have a social structure, right, a mindset that says we should only eat what's within our grasp, right, like some hunter-gatherer mentality, yes, and then you say we should innovate. It's a very strange paradox, isn't it, that you have a restrictive, restrained kind of level of ambition within which to innovate. So you're not really looking at a 360-degree future gears. you're looking at this kind of already restricted level of debate. So how do you?
No, because, for example, in Detroit, which has hundreds of acres of empty land, their innovation is to make inner city farms, for example. So you can ride your bicycle or walk them. I'm not being a complete trigger hugger here, but innovation doesn't mean coming up with a smaller battery which has a higher, energy density. It can mean other things if it means something like an urban farm.
Cool.
That's cool for me.
I know it would be, yeah. But I'll tell you one line. I've only got this in my hydrogen deck. So, Henry Ford said, his famous quote is, he had to invent the car to escape the boredom of a Midwestern farm. Right? Now, obviously, he didn't actually have to invent the car, but his idea was that he was so bored living in this parochial environment that he wanted to get out. And the only way he could get out was through mechanized means. And that was to start a car company in Detroit. Ironically, 100 years later, they're turning Detroit into a farm. Hey? It's good, Okay, thank you. I wanted to use that story for a long time. Right,
address the other part of this question you had. I think innovation is alive and well, and I think that the one thing that we can be certain of is that we don't know what's coming, and we can't see it until it's here. And so there will be major changes in transport that we don't have any way to predict. But the enablers, like better battery technology, will trigger innovative thinking that will create these things. And some of the ideas that are being tossed around now that are really interesting are things, if we had the ability to make flexible automated vehicles of various sizes, so you have some that carry 2 passengers, some that carry 20, some that carry 100, and they're moving on and off of automated highways at high speed, traveling very close together, and they're able to have freight, people, and whatever else you want to carry on those roads. And the efficiency of it becomes tremendous. The environmental impact is low again if it's electric or clean fuel of any kind. And the ability of people to get where they want to go in the most efficient way possible. There are so many economic drivers pushing us to create these things that they will happen, And things like traditional railways that are very constrained and having to get off at a station, and the economics of only being able to have so many stations, and the impact of putting too many stops on a line makes it impractical, it's too slow. These things are opportunities that will be engineered away. The rails may well go away and you'll have railless roads, doing essentially much of the same function. So I think that there will be major changes, and we just don't know what those are. But we can see some of the enabling technologies coming, and the ability for all the vehicles to speak to each other and to speak to the system is part of that, and that is happening. So I think it's in everybody's mind here. What are the ideas that can be done with that?
Yeah, again, the qualitative innovation point, I agree with the last point, if that registers in your definition of qualitative, but I think the network of different size and different types of autonomous vehicles has got a lot of potential. Another one that I like the idea of, I think there's some air traffic control challenges to get around, but the idea of the Matanet, which is kind of micro freight, it's almost like container shipping only for drones, so you'd have a whole network of little drone pads on top of buildings or whatever, and you could shuffle small packages around in quite an efficient way. People ask questions about what happens on windy days and things like that, but that could be potentially quite a qualitative new innovation that's not a million miles away, but I think the limits there are more legal than technical.
Remember the criticism of not enough politics. Right, final round. Quick questions if you don't mind. There's a gentleman at the very back who's had his hand up all the time.
Thanks. Particularly enjoyed Kevin's remarks. Just because you so rarely hear these days that sort of unconditional defence of mobility. But I just had a question about the thing that you were saying at the end, where you were talking about young people still being as enthused about mobility as they perhaps were in the past. And I have to say that's not really my experience anymore. Whenever I interact with young people just now, one of the things that they seem to do is to express actually some of the ideas that have been expressed on the other side of the table there. You know, some of the doom and gloom and the limits, the BlackBerry problem, as it will no doubt become known. So I just wondered, you know, to what extent do you think actually young people are enthused about mobility, and how actually do you convince them?
Thank you very much. The gentleman with the black t-shirt.
Thank you. Could the panel talk a little bit more about driverless technology and why they think it appeals to the contemporary imagination? Because to me it points to an ambivalence about the idea of personal autonomy. So to me, it, on the one hand, contains potential for people to individual travel in a very grudging way, but at the same time a kind of moral imperative that you're not going to enjoy being in charge of a motor vehicle and being in charge of your own routes, destinations, things like that. Is it not like a transport e-cigarette?
That's an intelligent question. I don't know the answer. Gentleman over there, please.
This isn't really to the panel, it's more to the lady who likes the Jetsons. There is actually flying car technology since 2011, where quantum levitation is used to create cars that fly and don't crash into each other. They'll just go into different planes due to induced magnetic fields.
Thank you very much. Gentleman here.
Yeah, my original point was going to just be, basically, we were talking about mobility. I think mobility is great. I just would like to add the kind of dimension of speed. I mean, I just think speed is completely brilliant as well. I've got limited holidays. I want to go to see Australia sometime in my life. I'd like to do it in 2 days just to see if I like it and come back. What concerns me is with driverless cars, I think, brilliant. We can have cars that can go at 120 miles an hour, probably without me driving it. But that doesn't seem to happen. What all of these new technologies seem to be about is just improving the experience of transport, not actually taking it up to the next level. Briefly on the politics, I think George Monbiot, of all people, was quite good on this, because he clarified that the sort of politics of transport is between those who want to kind of expand transport in mobility, etc., and those who want to restrain it. So I see that is where politics in transport has actually got to start at the moment, people arguing on both of those sides.
Right, I've gone crazy, so I'm going to take a couple more quick questions. You're never going to answer them all, but we'll enjoy the question.
I wonder why we are talking all the time about accelerating and speed and faster, and that having studied in the Netherlands, where people much rather take the money to buy a bike instead of buying a car. Why is this not possible in London? Why does London not have a bike grid, a green bike grid, a car-free bike grid where people can bike safely to work? When I bike to uni, I think it's deadly to bike on the roads here in London. And moreover, the air would be so much cleaner when I walk through London without having touched anything and come back in the evening and wash my hands. There's just some grey, black sauce going into the drain, and it's just this air that you're breathing in. Why accelerating? Why not going back to simpler methods?
Stunned silence. Yes, the filth of London. That's what we have about.
Well, just on that, 50 years ago, there were as many people using bikes in London as in Amsterdam, and now there are 350,000 bicycle users in Amsterdam, and we've barely got 3,500 here. For politics, we haven't talked about public transport, and this city has been transformed in my 50 years, with a bus lane with now tubes every minute and a half on most lines. We've stopped using our car, only for long journeys. So, and to put the politics in, what about public transport ownership? We've now got private railway companies and are giving them more subsidies than we used to give to British Rail. Oh, and one last one. Can you give us 3 lessons you've learned from China in public transport?
Go, don't take it. I'm meant to be the chair. I'm so impartial. We'll take these 2 points here, and I'm afraid I'll have to read it.
I think my original point is rather been lost, but I just wanted to reassure Kevin and the gentleman at the back that I am very much Generation Y, and I drive my gas-guzzling Land Rover tens of thousands of miles every year and love every minute of it. There is one, I remembered it now. The point about new cars manufactured dust to rust, it's probably not true. It's been a few years since I learned the statistic, but apparently 75% of all Land Rovers ever manufactured are still being driven today. And I think that's probably quite a good environmental fact when we sort of have an emotional reaction.
It's actually 17, but thank you.
So yeah, that's
that's a good job interview.
I was expressing interest because I got an arts degree in transport planning and management, but you don't seem to have said much about transport planning, and it strikes me there's a lot of thought about technology. Actually, shouldn't we be looking more at land use? And yes, people want to travel, but why they need to travel? Should we not duplicate a lot of facilities in London, up in the north? I also raised a seminar a couple of years ago on peak car, and less things have changed since then. Actually, a lot of youngsters aren't learning to drive. Going back to technology, we've got HS2. I'm sure why do you want HS2? Basically, because it's sexy. You actually look at what's required. I just say, go to Switzerland, go around on their network for a day, and you actually see what a travel network should be to get people out of their cars and give them a lot of mobility, and forget about all this gee whiz, we must go faster, it's sexy stuff. I just don't think that's what's required.
Okay, there you go. That's your lot. Back to you. So, in the order in which you started, Chris, from the start, you're not going to answer these questions, right? But you can make your final gestural goodbye with a nod to some of the points and whatever you want to say in coronation.
Okay. Capture one of the points first. I think there was a comment about do people really want autonomous vehicles, or is it an improvement or not? And I think that there's a wide spectrum of people. You know, some people love driving their car, and they go through the hedgerows in Surrey at high speed, and it's like they get a thrill out of this. You know, I drive between Oxford and Milton Keynes, going east to west, which is not good. And I go through 25 roundabouts on the way and can never get up to any decent speed. And even though I now have an electric car, which is a lot of fun to drive, I would love to be able to sit back and sleep or read or do anything but have to concentrate on going through those roundabouts. So I think it depends on the individual experience. And autonomous vehicles, I think, you know, they'll be phased in over the next 20 years. And some people will choose to have vehicles that have both capabilities, and they'll want to drive at certain times and be autonomous at other times. But I think the economic factors will eventually push it more and more to be fully automated, and you'll see driven cars become like horses are today, that a few people have them for recreation, you know. The reasons for that are that the ability of the vehicles to speak to each other and to the network will make them much safer, so you'll have fewer accidents with autonomous vehicles. And that will save, you know, a couple of 100,000 lives a year worldwide, so it's, you know, it's not insignificant. The other part of it is that you'll be able to go much faster, and I believe that speed will happen from this, that it won't be dumbed down and everybody moving at the most efficient speed of 30 miles an hour. I think you'll see that the motorways are now over 100 miles an hour with fully automated vehicles, because it can be done safely. And if they're moving in a controlled way and communicating with each other, it can be done fairly efficiently as well. So I think it's going to improve.
Thank you very much. It's interesting because when you first mentioned, you know, your idea for cars joining up, I thought, oh, he's just reinventing the train. But what you did was to invent something that sounded much better than the train. I mean, I can imagine that a potential fine use for autonomous cars is that when you join a motorway or autoroute, you become part of that efficient train, because the aerodynamics of a whole line of cars, one behind the other, is way better, which birds know about this when they fly, than the one car on its own. You know, and then when you get near to your turn off, it turns you off, and then you decide either to regain your own control, or it takes you to where you want to go. I think it's an interesting future. I think that you might say it leaves petrol then for extravagant entertainment, whether it's because you're driving an old car on the road, you know, or because you're going to a track to have some fun. But I think it's a strong possibility, you know. A few years ago as a designer, I would have hated the idea, you know, but actually it's a whole new interesting challenge. And I've discovered students like the idea of considering autonomous cars because it opens up some new areas for design inside and outside of the vehicle. You know, so I personally don't see it as a dead end. I think it's an exciting prospect. It would become part of public transport as well. Yes. Because the motorway bit would be the public transport. You're not into it. Got it. It's okay.
I hate to be the doom-monger, but I really think that, I mean, all of the improvements that we're talking about will allow everybody to do more travelling more of the time when they want to, and actually the net result will be much the same as we have today in terms of journey times between A to B. It's just that we can do it more often than we need to. I think somebody, I can't remember who it was, raised the question about Generation Y and mobility. I actually think that the Generation Yers, it seems to me the younger people of today have no less interest in their own mobility. You know, they're very keen on travel here, there and everywhere, probably far more than ever before. I think their interest is less in their having their own personal mobility device, if you like, which they have complete control of. They're much more in tune with being able to use whatever's around them, but they don't actually need to own their own vehicle. And so I think that's a key factor, certainly in the business world, that we need to take account of and are taking account of in terms of ownership models and how people can develop their ability to go where they want to go.
Thank you. Kevin. Well, just following on from that, I think that's the rhetoric, I would say, and I think there might be a different reality underneath that. So Gen Y is driving less. They're passing their test later and all the rest of it.
Not travelling less.
Not travelling less. Yeah. But what we found when we looked at this and a younger generation is that was primarily driven by economics and lack of resources. And they still, a lot of them kind of loathe public transport more than previous generations. They're a bit less tolerant of other people. And there's still that aspiration to drive, and there's a recent study that came out that zip cars are a kind of a stepping stone to their own car, particularly when they get moved towards families. So yeah, I think that's where the play best.
Right. My point is that, coming back to the point the lady made about politics, which is that, is that if you have a frame of reference, as far as I'm concerned, of the environment, for example, where the idea that travelling more or travelling at all has the possibility of causing harm, then you're obliged to travel less. It just seems to be a straightforward, logical conclusion of the framework of the argument. So if we have the notion that travel is damaging, whether it breaks up communities, whether it causes global warming, or whatever it might be, if this is your frame of reference, that travel is inherently harmful, then you have to do less of it. And if that's the discourse, then we can have all kinds of ingenious technological fixes on how we travel less. And I think that you can then have a nice discussion about fantastic innovations, but ultimately you're still batting your head against the wall, which argues that maybe we shouldn't be travelling at all or as much. And it kind of symbolises for me some of this discussion about like the Indian railways, where 30 years ago I went from Delhi to Varanasi on 21 hours on the train. And then I did it last year, and it took me 2 hours on an aeroplane. And while we might have the romance of the great British Empire national railways, right? Actually, most Indian people don't really enjoy the thrill of the trip, right? They want to get there, do their business, come back home. And I think this is the nature of progress. And as long as we see that as progressive and liberatory and advancing, and not see it as harmful and dangerous and bad for the environment, then I think we're on a good wicket. At the moment, I think the argument is a little bit too negative for us to actually make these predictions of the future, and the hover car still will be 30 years away unless we challenge the underlying negative perception of mobility. Anyway, that was my abuse of the chair position. Thank you all for listening, and my team. No, can I have a round of applause, please, for the speaker?